Okay. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Essence Podcast Into the Woods, in which I interview spiritual practitioners, traditional and folkloric witches, and everybody in between and outside of that. On today's episode, I'm really pleased to have somebody I've really wanted to connect with for a long time, somebody whose podcast I've listened to for a long time. I have Lyndon Bradley-Peters on. Hello, Lyndon.
Hello.
Hello. So, Lyndon, for those of you who may not know, I think a lot of the Druids and Obod people who are listening to this will know who you are because your podcast is a hit in the Obod community. For those who don't know who you are, Lyndon Bradley-Peters is a spiritual practitioner hailing from Northamptonshire in the UK. He is the co-host of Shove It Up Your Awen with the fabulous Clinty Ourin Burn, who of course was in season 1 of this podcast. Having a varied spiritual journey including Wicca, witchcraft, and Druidry, he has finally landed in Catholicism. Calling himself a Catholic charmer, he has a deep love for the mysteries and folk practices that make Catholicism such a deep and vibrant religion and practice. From prayer to charms and psalms, he does it all. Welcome, Lyndon.
Thank you very much.
Oh, you're very welcome. You're very welcome. So I don't even know where to start with you. Literally, I don't even know where to start with you. So you're let's start with the podcast. So you're the co-host of Shove It Up Your Awen.
Yes.
It's available on Spotify and all over the place now. Maybe you can introduce yourself through that. What brought you to doing this with Clint? 2 years ago now, something like that?
Yeah, it's been about 2 years. Yeah, it's been about 2 years. So what brought us to it? We decided there wasn't a podcast that bitched about all the bad stuff within the spiritual community. Basically, on the whole, we found ourselves sat there more often than not on a sofa, drinking cups of tea and coffee, being like, "Oh my god, did you hear so and so say such and such?" Proper like spilling the tea, and then we were like, "God, we should just make a podcast on it," because there was no one talking about all the shit that basically you find within the spiritual community as a whole. You know, no one path in particular. There's a lot of bad stuff out there, and there was no one really kind of rifling through it. There were people kind of giving their opinions on, well, this is what I do and this is blah blah blah, but like no one actually saying this is really toxic shit and it's not good for you. So so that's how it started really, and yeah, that's how it started. And
That's how it started. Yeah, just two people bitching on the couch.
basically,
And
yeah.
and occasionally drinking wine. Yeah. Yes,
Yes,
occasionally
absolutely.
drinking wine. I mean I think, when did I meet Clint? I started connecting with Clint, I think before before the podcast came out. It was back when he was doing the Goddess Grove meditations during the pandemic and all of that content
Yeah.
on there. Yeah, it feels like 100 years ago now, right?
I know, right?
Ridiculous. But it was very refreshing. I remember though that you had a lot of flack when you first put it out there in the first couple of episodes, because of the name.
Yes, yeah. Some people didn't like it. So I mean, we don't care. We don't care
Yeah.
at all. But yeah, there were a few people who found the name quite offensive. To which we gave each other a crisp high five over, because it's meant to be offensive, right? Shove it up your Arwen. It's meant to be offensive. I mean, since then, when we mention it to people, they kind of chuckle and they think it's hilarious. But yeah, at the beginning, there were a few, I don't know, people who took it way too seriously and were like, "Oh my god, you can't say that." Yes, we can. Whatever.
It's true. It's true. It's true. You can. And there's so many moments in it. Like, oh, I just love it. The Crystal Bitch Heather. Love Crystal Bitch Heather.
Yes. Yes. I
So
know. I
good.
can't stop doing it now, though. That's the problem. She pops out all the time.
Can't unsee her now, right? So funny. So funny. But there's so many. I think that's what makes it so relatable, is that we see all of these stock characters that you talk about all the time, right? Everywhere, you know.
So it's important for me, anyway, to highlight all this toxic behavior because, like, So the pagan community as a whole is quite young. I know everyone within the pagan community likes to think they're practicing some ancient religion from the bygone years of yesteryear. You're not. You're practicing a very modern practice in a modern society with modern things. You know, it's not like the days of yore, or even like proto-paganism. You know, it's got no connection to any of that. So you're practicing a very young religion or a very young spiritual practice. So it's important for me to make sure that the people who are practicing these things aren't repeating the problems that have happened with my faith. So with regards to Catholicism, Christianity as a whole has made a fuck ton of mistakes. You know, you take this pure and wonderful message, and then over the generations, more people have diluted it and twisted it. And then you've got segregation, so you've got Protestantism, and then you've got the many different types of things that come under the Protestant umbrella. So you've got like what the Baptists and all of the rest, and then and it all stems from like, and then you've got Puritanism, and the message just gets more and more and more twisted and confusing, and they've twisted a message of love into a message of hate and persecution, and it's all from misinformation, listening to the wrong people, messages being skewed, and you can see it happening within the pagan community. You have these fucking love and light idiots that are telling people that they're from a different galaxy and they need to up themselves to 5D and hug these crystals hard enough and all your problems will be cured, and you don't have mental health, you're an empath. No. So it's so important for me, and I suppose for Clint as well, to recognize these issues within the pagan community so that hopefully people don't fall into the same pit that unfortunately my religion did.
Right, and that's a really important point. I'm glad that you didn't go in that direction of apologizing, and we talked about that before we started recording, because as we know, like a lot of people, not all, but a lot of people come into paganism and alternative spirituality because of religious trauma. But I've sensed, and I mentioned this before, I sense that there's a lot of interest in, especially moving back into a solid cultural groundwork, which manifests all those beautiful pieces of love thy neighbor, not coveting your neighbor's gorgeous ass, right? All those things, right? Right, but it's one of those things. I feel like people don't know how to bring in that kind of community that is so prevalent in society, connected to Christianity, into paganism. So it becomes a very individualistic path. And then when people begin to go down that path of individualism, suddenly ego and me can come in, and then that develops into mental health because it's that disconnection, right? Mental health issues.
Yeah, absolutely. For me, I found my way back into, so I was never a Catholic to begin with. I was always a Protestant. So I was Church of England, going to Sunday school, and my mum actually pulled me out of it, because she was judged quite harshly. So my parents are divorced. It's not a problem. I had the best childhood ever. I had 2 separate homes, 2 Christmases, 2 birthdays. I had 2 of everything. Awesome. And like they did it from when I was really young. So at no point was it like, oh, my home is broken. I feel sorry for people that happens to later on in life, but for me, great. So my mum used to take me to church on the Sundays, and I loved it, and it was great. But then the vicar decided to do a sermon on broken homes and how single mothers are the bane of society. So so my mum stood up mid-sermon and gave him the eye, the evil eye, and then marched me out, and we never went back, and that was it. And I think, but I mean, by that point as well, she was very much aware that I was a very gay child. I literally cha-cha'd my way into the world. And I mean, back then, when I was little, I had gender dysphoria, like hardcore gender dysphoria. So I very much felt, and I used to tell people I felt like a girl in the boy's body, right from a little kid. That went away when my hormones kicked in, thankfully. So I'm very secure that I am a man. I feel like a man. I'm good. But for the longest time, I had those feelings. So when you become aware of what the church says, you kind of distance yourself, right? So that's what I did. I stepped away from the church. I backed away from it. I cut myself off from it. But I always loved the stories of Jesus. It always felt nice. I always felt warm and fuzzy. And then I experienced pagandom and went through all the myriad different pathways of Wicca, and then I went hardcore witchcraft, and then I went Druid. But what brought me back was I actually got duped into going to a service.
Oh,
I was tricked. Yeah, hardcore tricked. So Clint's partner Wayne is a
Wayne,
Catholic.
right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I was talking to him about it, and he was like, "Oh, we've got bones and stuff at the church. You should come see." So I was like, "Awesome."
Mm.
You know, who doesn't like going to see bones? So I was like, "Right, show me around your cathedral," because I love walking around churches. I always have. So he was like, oh, "Okay, come around 10:30, 10:45, and I'll show you around." So I was like, "Okay." So I turned up, and we went in, and he was like, "Oh, let's sit here." So we sat down, and I was like, "So you're gonna show me around?" And he was like, "Yes, after mass." And I was like, "Okay."
Mm.
So I was duped into observing a mass, and then I got shown around, and then it kind of went on from there, really. That's kind of how I got back into it. But being able to speak to a priest really helped. So Wayne is really good friends with Father Mark. I got to meet Father Mark through Wayne, and then I just got to ask him all the questions that had bothered me for so long about, like, does God hate me because I'm gay? And how does God feel about this, and how does God feel about that? And then having that wonderful and honest conversation with him put so many things into perspective that I was like, I've got nothing to worry about. Like, there are no issues, or there shouldn't be any issues. So why am I resisting this call that I feel, this pull to go back to like God, I suppose? So yeah, so I did.
I've heard many, I mean, apart from your podcast, I've heard many anecdotes of soon to be the Saint Father Mark. I mean, I hear many good things about this gentleman.
He's a good egg. He's a good egg.
And
He's one of
unfortunately, he's
these.
moving up, isn't he?
Yeah, well, they moved him to a nearby town, Corby, because they like to shuffle them around every so often. So he's gone there. So he's not too far away. So I still get to go see him.
Oh, there you go. That works. And Corby's like 20 minutes away. It's not too bad for you, right?
Yeah, thereabouts.
So something like that. Yeah.
It's about 20 minutes from Wellingborough. It's about 45 plus for me, but that's fine. It's worth the journey. Worth the journey.
Well, okay, let's talk about that call then, because having gone through kind of Wicca, witchcraft, and Druidry, that was quite a recent thing for you, Druidry, wasn't it? Like only about 5 or 6 years ago that you were involved in OWOD?
Yes.
Something like that, yeah.
I mean, you say involved in OBOD. I did the Bard course, never completed it, and I've never attended a gathering. So make of that what
I see
will.
what you mean. Well, one of the major criticism of OBOD, and I say that as a member of OBOD myself, is that it is very Anglican-like. It's very soggy biscuit kind of Christianity-like in the way that it's presented. It's all let's feelings, and it's definitely not that hard Methodism piece. And it certainly it's a very British form of Druidry, right?
Yeah.
What was missing for you? You said there was that call when you went and sat through mass, when you went to the church, when you saw the bones. What was that call? What was that deep call? Can you describe that for us?
No.
Okay.
Does that help? No. So the best way I could describe it is there's always been that once I stepped away from the church, there was something missing. And I tried to fill it with Wicca and with witchcraft and this desperate grab for personal power, right? Because everyone wants to be the wizard or the witch of the woods or whatever. And I tried desperately to fill it with personal power. And I did a lot of stuff and nothing really filled it. And then once I kind of went back to the church and I gave in and I was like, actually, what needs to fill it is God. And then it was like, oh, that fits. That feels good. That's all right. And yeah, that was it basically. So yeah, that's probably as best as I can do.
That was a really big question to like hoist onto you right now. I know that's, I mean, entire books have been written about that same subject for people, right? So, so I apologize for that. But I am curious because I think a lot of my listeners have that feeling of pull. I've certainly felt it myself, not necessarily maybe full bore back into Christianity, but certainly the culture, the spirituality of it, the relationships to it, especially with my ancestor work. There's that pull to be involved in something bigger that sometimes paganism can't quite get there because so many of the aspects are dead or long sleep, right? So I'm curious then, kind of extending on to that then, what changed for you? Because I know you went through confirmation not too long ago, like a year ago now. I think you've come up to a year since confirmation.
No, it was this Easter.
Was it? Oh, wow. Okay.
Yes.
I don't... Time. I don't know what time is. I don't know. Before that, though, like when you... well, tell us about when you decided confirmation was going to be a goal for you. When did you start to actively put that into process?
When I finally decided that this, like, being a Catholic was what I wanted, and then I was told that I couldn't receive the Eucharist, and then I was like, right, we're doing this because I'm not being denied. I'm not a person you say no to.
I see.
Basically, I don't like to think I have only child syndrome, but I have only child syndrome. So, yeah. So being told, no, you can't have this because, I was like, no, I can have that. And I'll go through the processes in order to make sure I do get that because I want it. So yeah, that was kind of why. But yeah, once I kind of was comfortable with my choice, because so for me, early on, the idea of, well, once I do this, I have to give up all my power, which is a very selfish way of thinking. And very ego driven. That was the biggest thing. I didn't want to feel helpless. I'd spent all these years like gathering all these books and learning, like, to say spells is ridiculous, but learning like rituals and processes and how animism works and what herbs to use for what and how to formulate my own stuff and having a deeper understanding of how, like, quote unquote magic works, to then gather all that up and just chuck it in the bin and be like, nah, you don't need that. No, absolutely not. I couldn't justify that decision. But then once I started going kind of down the path and I realized, actually, I don't have to, because all of that is still within Catholicism. You just have to look at it with a slightly different lens. Give up some things, but then you get other things instead. So yeah, even trade.
That makes a lot of sense. I was just about to ask you kind of how your life has changed since then, but it seems like things have just transformed.
Yeah. I'm a much better person, Ben.
Join the WI, right? Right.
Yeah.
Well, it's yeah. You're one of the flower ladies, yeah, shouting at the priest about what geraniums you're going to have. Yeah,
quite right.
I love it. Well, it's interesting. One of the things I've flirted with in my life, again, because it's a cultural piece, especially with what I'm studying right now with medieval studies, right? Catholicism was like you couldn't remove Catholicism from the culture, especially English culture, right? It was for 1,000 years part and parcel with English culture, and then suddenly that shifted, and suddenly Henry VIII broke with Church of England, with the Church in Rome, and suddenly you had all of these like little mushrooms of Protestant churches growing up all over the place, right? I felt a draw to that ancestral piece for me. When I was back home in about 12 years ago, I went to Canterbury Cathedral and wandered around, and like the big cathedrals, like as a pagan, I shouldn't feel comfortable in those spaces, but it was like, wow, because I felt like I was tying into an ancestral piece for me. I feel a lot of people in the pagan world, they get to a place where there's that drawback to something, especially when they're going into ancestral work. But it's that idea of, oh, well, all these ancestors are Christians. How could I possibly connect with them? Oh, well, I'll connect with my Viking ancestors from, 1,500 years ago, right? Or my ancient Celtic ancestors, right? Ignoring all those ancestors in between. I'm curious for you, how can I ask this? You said just now that you found all of the things you'd been seeing in paganism, the spell work, the rituals, all of those pieces in Catholicism. How do you navigate in Catholic spaces while performing magic, and especially from a folk traditional point of view? How do you navigate in those spaces, and where do you how do you navigate between those two spaces?
Okay, so the biggest,
that makes sense.
Yeah. So the biggest one is you have to step away from this notion of magic, because it's no longer about me. And this was the biggest mental shift, is so as a pagan, you're used to this kind of idea of self-sovereignty, right? You intone spells and things multiple times to build up the power and build up the energy. There's loads of rituals of like going on like a serpent walk and stirring the energy of the land and building it up within you, and then you trapping it and harnessing it and using it in your rituals, or building the power within yourself and blah blah blah, etc etc. We have none of that. That was probably the biggest and the hardest lesson I had to learn, is that the power isn't mine. So while I have authority, while I have authority to do stuff, it isn't my power. So I don't have to worry about feeling anything. At no point do I, when I do a working, I don't have to sit there and kind of, everyone, when I was doing like Wicca, I'd sit there with my eyes closed, and you'd kind of open one eye and be like, has something happened yet? Has it manifested? What's going on? There's none of that, because you literally you say the words, and then you trust that it's done. Faith and trust, and that's the biggest thing. So it's no longer about magic. It's about, this is the prayer I'm using, with faith that it will happen.
It's the intercession piece, right?
Yeah. So within a Catholic space, that works really nicely. And this is where the use of psalms works, right? You've got within any kind of religion or spiritual practice, you have the law of praxis. So anything that is recited over generations for thousands of years, whatever, carries with it the weight of those generations and the power of those generations, which is why things like the psalms work so well. One, because they're prayers, poems, songs, exaltations to God. So they carry with them that meaning, but also because they have been said for so often. So I know that when I say, for example, I don't know, Psalm 91 for protection, I have to say it once. I don't have to worry about feeling anything. It's done. Or like chanting the breastplate of St. Patrick, a very good protection psalm. I love it. Brilliant deliverance prayer. I say it once and I walk away. You have to get used to kind of laying these things at the foot of the Lord and walking away from it and not thinking about it again. Trust and faith. That's the biggest power shift in the power dynamic. I don't have to sit there chanting it for hours on end to make something happen. Because again, it's not my energy, it's God's. So it works really well in a Catholic space, because whoever looks at me is just going to be like, oh, he's praying. Because that's all I'm doing.
Right.
So, I don't have to do anything else other than that. So yeah, basically it works really, really well.
I was going to say, as you were speaking, there were so many pieces. Again, I feel like a lot of people are trying to tie back into a traditionalist approach, whether it be Cunningman or witchcraft, like traditional witchcraft, right? So as you were saying, that strikes me as a different kind of approach than, say, the Cunningman, who still sees the same worldview. It's all within the purview of God, but it's manipulating then God's creation from with your own skill. For you, it's more of a faith practice as opposed to a magical practice.
Yeah, this is why I went with if I have to describe myself in a magical context to magical people, I will say I am a Catholic charmer, because I am a Catholic and I work with Catholic-based charms. Also, charmers traditionally, whereas cunning men, there was always an exchange, right? Financial, or you would pay them with chickens or whatever. Charmers generally didn't accept any payment. They would just come, they would do the thing, and then they would go. And also, they didn't really, from what I've managed to read, they didn't really deal with spirits. So yes, they dealt with Psalms. Yes, they dealt with kind of more Abrahamic based stuff, but they didn't have relationships with spirits, whereas a lot of cunning folk did. So yeah,
that makes sense. No, that makes sense. That whole again, coming out of that grimoire tradition where Solomon conjuring spirits to have power over them in the name of God and whatnot, but not having relationships. That makes sense. That makes sense. Now, that being said, you have relationships with saints and angels, though, in your practice, don't you?
Yes, I do.
I was going to say. What was it like to start working with them versus some of the pagan deities or ancestral spirits that you had been working with Wicca and Druidry and all of those other practices? What was that like to start to form those relationships?
Difficult, and I'm not quite there yet. I will be honest, I'm not quite there yet. The biggest question I've really struggled with, and I still struggle with it now. I think I've kind of about gotten there, but I'm still struggling with it. Is why on earth should I pray to a saint when I can just pray to God? And I'm like, why? Why do I need to go to this person and ask them to intercede on my behalf when I can just go to God and be like, this is what I need, please? But the more I think about it, and I've spoken to a few people and I've spoken to a few priests, and while I can pray to God and it's important to build a relationship with God, when it comes to things I need or things I want more specifically, I shouldn't really pray for that because that's like greedy, right? So I should be praying for other people. So if I see someone else that wants something, I will pray for them. And then the idea is that either they pray for me or I can ask a saint to intercede and then they pray for me on my behalf.
Right, that makes sense.
That's generally kind of as much as I've managed to figure out how it should work. And also it's like having a spiritual prayer group, right? You know, I need help. Let me gather all my saints together. Please pray for me. Bing, bang, boom. Perfect. So it's been interesting. I haven't quite got it nailed down yet. I don't work with angels.
You probably don't want to say nailed down in this context.
Why not, right?
Sorry, I just had to. I love Christian humor. Sorry.
Why not? Brilliant.
But sorry, you're saying angels.
That's right. I don't really work with angels. I work with and I hate this because it sounds all love and light language, but like my guardian angel. Everyone has an angel, apparently. So while I haven't spoken to mine or heard a voice, I do ask that they pray for me and they do give me guidance. Other than that, I haven't worked with them. They're busy, man. They're doing stuff. Like, when I see these people that are like, we're going to call down Saint Michael. Why? Why would you do that? He's busy doing things.
Well, and he's big too, right? He's big. Yeah.
Like, no. So, I've got no interest in working with angels. Saints, fine. Like, I think I feel more comfortable working with them because I know that they were people, right? They were human ones.
Yes.
I generally kind of know what I'm going to get. So, that's fine. But angels, they can stay where they are. Apart from the one who's like with me and meant to be with me, I'll talk to them. But the rest of them, no, I'll leave them be.
Makes a lot of sense. To be honest, it's a big struggle, like regardless of the community. One of my practices is Espiritismo, which is it's a syncretic tradition from the Caribbean. You find it in Voodoo, you find it in Santeria Lukumi, and it's actually French Spiritism, which is like within that Catholic frame of mind. Allan Kardec really rooted that tradition within the Catholic framework, right? And the idea that that working with muertos, with the dead, is more like working with saints because they lived, and knowing that they lived, they had that experience, they can be a little bit more what's the word? They can be more understanding than an angel that comes down and is like, well, why don't you do all these things? Why? What's the problem?
Yeah, exactly.
Because they don't know. They never lived. They don't know what it's like to have aches and creaks and, crystal bitch Heather right next door. You don't know, right?
No, it's true. It's very true.
Yeah. But what
So,
struck me about what you were saying just then is, I mean, even like this is a living, evolving practice for you, and so I'm curious, what have you learned about yourself over the span of the past 2 years? What have you learned about yourself?
oh, that I'm a wicked, wicked man. Um,
Who
I
needs
don't
to be
know. I suppose
punished?
absolutely, absolutely. Um, I don't know. It's interesting. So I'd probably say, so the biggest thing that people like to say, like us Catholics, you know, we feel guilty all the time because of, you know, the rite of reconciliation and whatever. It's actually a really beautiful sacrament to have, because it's like free counseling. You know, it's perfect. I can go to my priest. I can say whatever, whatever's bothering me or the things I've done that are weighing on my conscience, and then I can walk away and I know, one, he can't say anything about it. Perfect. And two, I've offloaded. I've offloaded this burden that I no longer have to carry, which is perfect. So for me personally, I suppose the biggest thing I've learned is how much I carried around before this transformation. Because before you can be confirmed or baptized, you have to confess. So that first confession, they like you to do as much as you possibly can. So it's kind of like, you know, get the scroll out and read down. So realizing just how much baggage I had carried around for so long. So now I feel a lot lighter. I feel a lot better. I definitely feel more capable of enforcing my boundaries. That's a big one. I think before I was too not keen to please. That makes me sound like some kind of, I don't know, harlot. But I was more eager to, you know, if I didn't want to do something but other people did, I would be like, oh no, that's okay, I'll go along. And
Your
then if
boundaries will
something,
be, yeah.
yeah. So my boundaries are a lot stronger for the simple right that, you know, I want to live my life as close to the Gospels as I can, because that's the whole point, right? You know, you don't just become a Catholic just to be an asshole and then confess it at church later. I want to be a good person. So it's made me take stock of the areas of my life that needed improving, the things that I did before that I could have done better, and it's helped me enforce my boundaries a bit more. I still suck. I'm still a bad person here and there. Like I still notice, like I can be really bitchy and mean, and I love gossip. I love gossip. So it's helped me kind of take stock of that. Just as I'm kind of starting to kind of slip into that. So tell me more. I then kind
Right.
of have to like, no, stop. Don't go down that road. Be a good person. So
That's the beauty of free will, though. Really, I mean, within that Catholic worldview, the whole idea of having free will is so that you have those moments of, okay, I'm going to catch myself. Okay, I learned something about myself in that moment. Okay,
yeah,
I'm going to move this direction and not that direction. Right?
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, that's beautiful. Well, I have a million questions now on that, but I'm curious with that then, coming to being confirmed later in life, not too much later in life, of course, but you know, you weren't confirmed, right? Well, you weren't confirmed when you were 12 or 13. I think that's 12 or 13 is when most people get confirmed in the faith, if they were raised in the faith. What was that like for you to go through that process kind of later in life then?
I don't know, good, I suppose.
Mm,
Because I never, it's hard to compare, isn't it? Because obviously I wasn't confirmed
mm.
younger in life. You can only be confirmed
Right,
once.
right, right.
But
Yeah, yeah,
for, for me now, it was good. It was really, really good because I'm old enough to ask the right questions.
yeah. Mm,
So
mm,
before I was confirmed, I had to go through about 6 months worth of RCIA lessons. Um, which is where they basically teach you what it means to be Catholic. So you go through what everything in the church means, what God is, as far as the Catholic Church is aware. You go through bits of the Bible, you go through the Rosary, and then just like loads of different topics. And then you can kind of ask questions and things like that afterwards. So yeah, it was really, really good. Yeah, oh, it was
yeah.
brilliant. So I'm glad it happened later on in my life because I was able to ask those questions. Whereas if it happened when I was younger, I probably would have been either one, too scared to ask the questions, or like, I don't know, too naive to actually understand what any of it really meant.
I was going to say that I know that was one of the major criticism of Protestantism against Catholics is the idea, especially from like Anabaptists or like people who say you have to be older in order to, you know, be fully taking ownership of this, right? But from a cultural point of view, it's a rite of passage, it's a stage, right? So it was definitely, yeah, absolutely. So there's the confirmation process, and then there's the actual confirmation. And I remember reaching out to you when it happened. Now I remember that it was actually Easter time. You're right. And I think you spoke about this on the podcast. You were talking about kind of the change inside you felt, because it is an initiation. Can you help people who have never gone through a process like this? I think a lot of listeners here will come from a Catholic background, probably were confirmed when they were younger. But for those who didn't, what, on an energetic level, how do you feel like you changed? Like, what happened for you?
Oh, so much. God, it was a crazy time. So like there was literally I think there was a massive service every day for about a full week, and I attended most of it because I wanted to be like go into it full 100%. So I had like one day I had confirmation, and then there were multiple services where like they closed down the whole church, all the statues are covered, the crucifix is covered, all the holy water is removed, they removed the Eucharist, so there's no presence of the Lord in the church at all. There are no bells rung, no hymns are sung, nothing. So you have that kind of that stripping back of everything that's sacred in this building, and then it all gets kind of brought back in on the night that your Easter Vigil, the night that you're confirmed. You'll bring the light back into the church, the bells ring out. It's just so like on a purely ritualistic level, disregarding any of the spiritual, it is a wonderful thing to behold. I think if anyone is curious about either getting in touch with the faith or seeing what the faith offers, go and see an Easter Vigil service. So Easter is more important to us than Christmas. People kind of bang the drum about Christmas, and then everyone likes to remind us that, well, Jesus wasn't really born on Christmas. We know, like, we get it. We know we appropriated the holiday. We get it. But like, the birth of Christ isn't the important bit. People seem to forget that. They think that's the bit. We all want to worship the baby under the star with the camels and the donkeys and whatever. No, that's not the important bit. The important bit and the whole purpose and point of God coming to earth is that removal of sin and the kind of conquering of death and the opening of the gates of heaven and all of that. And that's what's celebrated on the Easter Vigil. So if anyone's ever considering it, don't go to midnight mass on Christmas. Just don't. The important one to go to is the Easter Vigil, because that's when baptisms, confirmations take place. That's when you see and feel, in my point of view, the presence of God at its fullest. It's just, I don't know, it's just mind blowing. It's just a sensation on an entirely different level, but you have to be open to it. If you go there with your arms folded and you're like, rah, then you're not going to experience any of it. But if you go with an open mind, it's wonderful. And like we saw things, so Clint was there, which was lovely. He came to support me, and his partner Wayne was my sponsor. But we witnessed things there that, like, I suppose have ties that, or people could see parallels to the pagan world. So there's this moment where the bishop, I don't actually know what the tool is called, but he pulled out there's one of his little servers held up a little box and he opened it and he pulled out this silver rod. It was about this big, and he pulled it out and he lightly inscribed one of the candles. And Clint hadn't really clocked it, and I leant down to him and I just whispered in his ear, "That's a wand." And Clint was like, "Oh my god, it is a wand." I was like, "Of course it is." He's using an implement to channel power into a candle, like So there's loads of little bits like that. So if you're open to it and you pay attention, you'll see a lot. There's so much symbolism and so much, so much synchronicity between the two. But for me to go through that, to experience it, was immense. That's the only way I can describe it, really. It was immense. There was so much, and it took me so long, probably a good 2 months afterwards, to dissemble it and break it down and really assess how I felt. because you build up to this event, right? And then it happens, and then it's like, what now?
Right.
But it was amazing. It was climactic. It was climactic.
That's an apt term, though. I know friends who've gone through the process later in life too. They talk about that. It is a climactic thing, right? It is that there's something inside that changes. You're filled up with something, literally, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's
the
beautiful.
feeling of grace was amazing. So, yeah.
Where is that now for you? Is it still kind of lingering, or is it a thing that's always going to be a part of you?
Yeah, it's always there. It's always there. I mean, you don't. It's like anything. You don't feel it as intense or as acute as you did before, because you're in a heightened state of alertness and everything's happening around you. But it's still there. I feel it. It never goes away. At that moment, like during the confirmation, we receive the gifts of the Holy Spirit.
Right.
Those gifts don't leave you. So, the idea behind it is that I always have the Holy Spirit within me and with me. So, yeah. And there are some days where maybe I don't feel it as intense, but I suppose that's more up here than it is in here. Yeah.
It makes sense. No, that makes sense though. I think anybody of any religion can empathize with that, because you suddenly get caught in this mundane world, and your attention is directed towards things that don't really matter in the long term, but seem like they're huge in the short term, right? Yeah. Okay, I have several directions I want to go with this. I guess mainly I want to hear from you then, having gone through that very official process, going to Roman Catholicism classes, going through this confirmation in the cathedral, in that space of official Catholicism. How does folk Catholicism come into your practice now? Like, where do you sit with that? Because I mean, obviously, as part of the culture, so many folk practices were connected with Catholicism, going and getting the wafers and sprinkling them on the fields back in the day, and bringing a branch from the what do you call it, the palm leaf, right, to bless the house. Where are you sitting with those sorts of things? Does that come into your practice? Is it more official Catholicism? Like, where do you sit with all of that?
I love it. So this was one of the big parts that made me feel 100% secure in it. So I had the official, like, Catholic whatever practices, and then there's all the folk stuff that I absolutely love. That's the charmer part of me. That's the bit where I'm like, I like that. I'm going to do that. So like things like burying 4 Saint Benedict medals around your house to protect it. Love it. I just think it's great. I just think it's brilliant. Even like some of the ones that I thought were a bit more folky aren't. So I took chalk to get blessed by a priest, and I thought, oh my God, is he going to do it? Isn't he going to do it? Is he going to raise his eyebrows at it on the night of the Epiphany? And I went over, and we've got this wonderful priest at our cathedral, Father Andrew. And he has the voice of an angel. He is wonderful. And he's really, really lovely. And he did his training in Rome. And I went over to him, and he said to me, he was like, you're the only person who's brought me chalk to bless. And he was like, it's lovely. Thank you very much. So I was like, that's awesome. So then I went home and I inscribed, the 3 initials of the 3 wise men and the date, and that then protects your house for a whole year. I love it. I love all the folk practices. I think they're brilliant. I don't know enough of them yet. I'm still collating all that information, but I think it's brilliant. I think it's brilliant, and just old Christian habits fall into that as well. I love it, because if it was good enough back then, it should be good enough now.
That's the thing, right? That's exactly it, right? Yeah, a lot of my my guests who come from more like Protestant Christian background, but who are entirely folk traditions. It's fascinating to see kind of that period when settlers were coming over here. how so many of these, like, using the Bible to bless babies, placing a baby on top of the Bible to bless them, and then, all of these things, or whatever it is, or inscribing Bible verses around a house of chalk, right? How much of that goes back to that Catholic medieval heritage? And really, how many of those things, like, go back even 1,000 years before that, right? That continuity of tradition, just different worldview. What has been surprising for you? Have you come across any folk traditions that have just been like, wow, like what is this?
No, not yet.
No. Okay.
Not yet. I suppose because I come from, my background is like witchcraft and Wicca and all that kind of stuff. There isn't a whole lot that surprises me. Sometimes I'll see something and I'll be like, I'll have a laugh to myself and I'll be like, oh, that reminds me of such and such that I used to do. But at no point have I've been too shocked, really. Yeah, I take liberties with it. I mean, I know my priests would completely disagree, but in my mind, if they can bless stuff, I can bless stuff. I don't see why not. Jesus says I can in the Bible, so as far as he's concerned, I can do it. So I do it. I haven't gone as far as I haven't gone as far as performing the act of transmutation, transubstantiation on the host.
That would definitely be an excommunication thing.
Yeah, I feel that's a step too far. But with regards to like blessing water, blessing salt, blessing my home, things like that, I see no reason why I can't do it. Because they make a big thing during confirmation to say, once you've been confirmed, you are no less a Catholic than the Pope. Well, if I'm no less a Catholic than the Pope, then surely I can do it. I just don't have the training.
Well, that's the thing with those traditions. That training is to perform very specific tasks, right? Being that kind of intermediary. But if you're working directly with the big guy upstairs, it makes sense. Or the big person upstairs, I should say. Yeah. How did your relationship to the landscape change?
For the better, I think.
For the better, yeah.
So I really struggled with animism when I was pagan. I really struggled with animism, only because I think I looked into it far too deeply. So, like, I understood that animism is the basis that everything has a spirit. But then my brain would go, okay, so the river has a spirit. But then, like, the river's made up of singular drops of water. Do they have a spirit? And then there are molecules in that. Do they have a spirit? Like, if a rock is shattered into a million pieces, are they all their own individual spirits? Or is it one spirit that's been shattered into a million pieces and cries out in pain for millions of years? Like, my brain just could not quantify it. Whereas now, I can just go, it's all God. And then I'm done. Everything is sacred. It's all God. So, done. Anyone who's interested, so I appreciate not everyone in the church sees things like that. They tend to think God is up there, we're down here, and there's like a great divide. But a really great saint who saw otherwise, who was probably the closest to Jesus as anyone's ever going to get, was Saint Francis of Assisi. And his Canticle of the Sun is beautiful. And in it, he goes through, and I think any pagan who reads it is going to see similarities with regards to, especially like Wicca, with how he goes through everything. Like, what is it, brother fire, brother wind, sister water, sister Mother Earth. It's brilliant. It's so beautiful the way it's written. So I recommend reading it to anyone who's interested, because it is stunning.
I haven't read that yet. I have read his Sermon to the Birds, and that was just like, beautiful. I know Peter Owen Jones, Reverend Peter Owen Jones, takes him as his own personal saint. And I think he did you ever see How to Live a Simpler Life? No, Peter Owen Jones is the Church of England vicar down in Sussex, and he's done like tons of series. One of the series was Around the World in 80 Faiths. I'm pretty sure you've seen it. I remember Clint mentioning that you'd said he goes Extreme Pilgrim. He went to.
Oh yes.
That's right.
I saw the one where he went and stayed with the Desert Fathers.
Yes. So Father Barnabas. Yeah. Love him. He did a TV show, How to Live a Simpler Life. One of the episodes was pilgrimage, and he walks to Devon, literally walks all the way to Devon over the span of the episode, and he talks about St. Francis of Assisi and that journey of not like giving up monetary value, not being able to touch money, and relying and offering himself up to other people's grace and other people's charity. And he said how connected he felt after that process, not only to the landscape because of what the landscape could provide and where, but that sense of surrender. Right, absolutely love that. And St. Francis was all about surrender, wasn't he?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Oh, that's beautiful. I'm gonna have to look that up now. Thank you. I don't know where else to go with this conversation, actually. I think you've answered most of my questions. Well, I mean, for me, like I've explored these things. I think a lot of my listeners have explored these things for themselves. And I think we were chatting before about how sometimes you're uncomfortable being in pagan spaces because of that, understanding of religious trauma and whatnot. But I feel like there is a craving to find examples of people who are finding those balances for themselves. Do you feel like you found a balance for yourself?
Well, yeah, absolutely. Well,
Finding.
so I don't know. Balance is probably the wrong word because I've completely changed. Like there's people out there that I've listened to podcasts where people class themselves as like Catholic witches. I personally, my own opinion, I don't think you can do that. Just purely because one goes against the other, right? Witchcraft is inherently it's anti-establishment, it's chaos, it's making bargains with spirits to gain power, and then the other one is about surrender and peace and following the status quo, and one is very much against the patriarchy, and while I'm all for that, that's fantastic. You can't, I don't think you can mix and match. I think you can, to one sense, have a spirituality that incorporates magic and look towards things like psalms and saint work, but you've got to then look at the other relationships you're cultivating. So if you've got people that are working with probably darker, more aggressive deities, or beings like Hecate and whatever, and then all of a sudden you're petitioning Saint Michael the Archangel or whatever, like one does not work well with the other. You've got to look at what that means. And also, we're in an age where appropriation is a massive thing, right? Cultural appropriation is humongous. So like when you get people, and we've all seen them and we've all heard them, people who have like an image of Immaculate Mary, but they'll also work with Ganesha, but then they'll also work with a Native American spirit, but then they'll also work with something else, and then they'll realign their chakras, etc., whilst banging their Native American drum. And you think, fuck me, lady, like pick something and stick to it and honor it and treat it as sacred. So if we're frowning upon people appropriating other cultures, we shouldn't then accept or be ready to accept other people appropriating Catholic culture, because it isn't just a religion, it's also a whole culture that goes with it. So I think if people want to work with saints, if they want to make that bridge, if they want to have that balance, you've got to understand that when you shift into Catholic mode and you want to work with saints and psalms, it's no longer about you. You have to leave your ego at the door, and it's about surrender, and it's about trusting, like what I said earlier, that you say it once and it's done. It's not about standing in the woods, lighting candles, sprinkling incense, calling on the powers and the quarters and the guardians of the watchtowers and any of that. It's, which by the way is Christian. But like it's not about that. It's about like, I'm leaving my ego at the door. This is what I want to do. This is my need that I need to do. I'm looking to protect someone. This is a protection psalm that I'm saying. You say it, you leave it. You want to work with saints, light a novena candle for them, do it over 9 days, say your prayers, and then leave it and walk away. And then if you want to switch back into witchy mode or whatever, or druid mode, and work with your own power, do it. But to cross the two doesn't work, because you can't stand before the Lord with arrogance. It does not work. It does not work. You're dealing with something infinitely more powerful than anything you will ever face, and you'll get smacked on your ass for it. So I think if people want to find that balance, you've got to be wise enough and smart enough to understand when your ego is speaking, and when you're being honest, and when you're, and if you're able to leave your ego at the door, that's when you can work with both. But if you can't do that, then don't, because
Makes
it's not going to
sense.
work.
That makes sense. That speaks to that kind of organic way that when Catholicism or when Christianity was the dominant worldview, things that were nestled underneath, practices that were nestled underneath that worldview were in total alignment with that worldview, right? Now we have such a multicultural kind of, anybody can, like, buffet sometimes. And I agree with you. I think that is the danger of cultural appropriation. Is that it becomes so confusing. The who are you actually communicating with? What is the message? What is the goal here? Right? It's like a gumbo, but without any spice, right? Yeah.
We've seen throughout history beautiful moments where things have kind of meshed, like you mentioned. So, like, especially within like Catholic Irish culture, there's this rich and strong belief in fairies and land spirit, with the Catholic kind of layered over the top, and how like you have to treat them with respect. But then there are also processes in place to kind of keep them at bay and kind of remove them and things. And that's why we start to see things like the Rowan cross, for example. It's not just a cross, but there's also red thread, which is a nice little folk kind of charm. But then also the rowan wood itself negates fairies. So there's loads of lovely little bits like that. So there is an avenue to work with it. You just have to be respectful of it, and you've got to kind of do your research.
That makes sense. No, that makes total sense. Where do you think people should go to do their research? Because there are all sorts of writers out there who will say all sorts of things. I'm one of them, but who would you say, like, where if somebody was of an Italian background, an Irish Catholic background, or Polish background, whatever it is, where would you suggest people go in order to start to develop that sense for themselves?
Oh, that's a really
I
hard
know.
It's really hard. Well, so I think the biggest thing that people need to have is discernment, right? Don't take one thing. New generation of people, this is going to make me sound really old, but the new generation of people, young people, they'll watch one TikTok video and they're like, oh my God, this is it. That's not it. That's one TikTok video, which is probably a load of shit. So the best thing I can recommend is multiple sources. And if after multiple sources you're seeing a similar thread, then that's the way to go. Don't just read, like, obviously I'm going to say the Bible. The Bible is amazing. But don't just take the Bible. You've also got to look at folk history. Any books on folk history, especially local folk history, there will be elements of Christianity within it and charms and things like that. You've just got to learn to peel back layers of the story. There's loads of wonderful stuff out there. Yeah, you just got to be discerning. And like, there's no excuse not to learn nowadays. We've got the blessing of the internet.
Yep,
you don't
right
have
here
to go
too.
to the library anymore. Exactly, like the internet, such a wonderful tool. So do your research, scan through loads of information, and then use your own discernment to recognize what feels right and what doesn't. And if what you've assimilated feels like a load of old tripe, then just cast it away. But if you're reading something and there's about 6 other sources that also verify it, and you think that actually makes sense, then yeah, take it up as good information. And you can always have a good chat with your priest about it. I mean, maybe don't mention to your priest about magic and fairies and things like that, because they'll punish you a heretic and kick you out. But if you have questions about the history of the church and about old practices, there's a lot of stuff that priests are taught that they're also told not to do, not because they're not allowed to do it, it's just for efficiency's sake. So we've got a new priest at the cathedral at the moment, Father Daniel. I love Father Daniel. He's wonderful. He does a lot of the old traditional prayers. So when the Eucharist goes through the rite of transmutation, he uses the old prayers. It takes longer, but it's beautiful, and I love it.
That's in Latin, right? Not the English vernacular.
Yeah, so sometimes he does it in Latin, sometimes he does it in English, but it is just a much longer prayer. There's more.
Oh, okay. So like pre-Vatican II type prayers.
Yeah, which is lovely, and I love it. And little things like when he holds the Eucharist, once he's touched it, and puts it down. He then keeps his fingers closed because he doesn't want to risk dropping any of the body of Christ. So his fingers are then complete. So when he's doing this, he's kind of got that thing going on.
Right.
Which when I first noticed, I was like, why is he doing that? But then I asked him about it and he told me. So I think it's important to have conversations if you know a Catholic church near you, to go and talk to a priest, just to have these questions raised. Like, are there old prayers? Is there an old prayer book you can recommend for me to go read? Is there somewhere that would be a good source for Catholic folk tales or things like that? And they'll know the information. They're just not, they're just not going to do it themselves because it doesn't fit the modern kind of standpoint of the church, or how a mass should go now. They very much like to keep a mass within an hour, whereas before,
Right.
mass would overrun, especially in Ireland. You'd probably be there for about 4 hours.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. That speaks to that, like, the lifestyle aspect of it, though, right? I mean, back studying medieval history, like, it was a lifestyle. It wasn't so much I'm going to the church now. It's, let's go to the church now. It's not, I'm a Christian. It's I am, right? Yeah, it pervades all, right? I'm curious for you, how has your lifestyle changed since confirmation? Like your everyday routine, like what's happened for you?
Not a lot.
Not a lot.
Not
okay.
a lot. No, not a lot. The only thing that's changed is I go to church on a Thursday and a Sunday, and that's it. Which is nice. On a Thursday, we go to mass at 7 o'clock, and then afterwards we go to the pub.
Mm-hmm.
So,
with Father Mark, right?
Well, no, because he's in Corby now. So we go with Father Daniel instead.
Okay. I love that. Every time I had a chat with Clint a couple of weekends ago. We had a good catch up, and he was filling me in all of what's been happening, and it sounded like Father Daniel has really bonded with the community. Like he's just fitting in.
Yeah, he's doing good. He's doing good.
That's good. My last question for you, and I guess this is more of a cultural question more than anything, because I feel like a lot of people, they who are interested in reconnecting with their either Catholic or their Protestant past, specifically Catholicism, especially not growing up. Obviously North Americans don't realize quite how tense certain parts of the UK and Ireland can be when it comes to Protestant versus Catholicism. There's a big history around that piece. As somebody who didn't grow up Protestant, who didn't grow up Catholic, but is now part of a Catholic community in England, which is a very hidden community, really. At least that's my perspective of what I've seen. What was it like for you to join the living community there?
It was lovely. I mean, I remember when I was young going to church, and it was quiet. I do love a lot of the Protestant churches, because a lot of them they're the old original churches. So they're these beautiful stone buildings. They're cold, they're quiet, they're echoey. There's a lot of history there carved into the walls. They're beautiful places to go to. Whereas like Catholicism, a lot of the places, they're not as old, because Catholicism was outlawed in England for a very long time.
Yeah, I think the Emancipation Act was like, what, 1859 or something like that? It was very, yeah.
So I do love going to Protestant churches, and you're used to seeing dusty old communities in these churches. There'll only be about 10 people there, if that. Most of them are old. There might be one married couple with a baby. And that's about it. Versus I go to mass on a Sunday, and more often than not, there isn't a free pew in sight. Like, it is packed. It is packed. And even on a weekday mass, I'd probably say we've got an attendance of about 30 people. So I feel like I've made not only the right spiritual choice for myself, because it's full of like all the folk practices, and then you've got all the actual like the rituals within Catholicism and the blessings and everything like that. But also like there's a huge community behind it, and I love that. Yeah, I like that. I would hate nothing more. Like there's a church in the centre of Northampton where I live called All Saints. And it's a lovely building, it's nicely gilded, it's beautiful. They've got the old Latin Mass altar at the front. It's beautiful. But you've got this huge building I think about 6 people turn up for church every day.
Hmm.
You know, it's not
Yeah.
great. So I don't know. I don't
That's
know.
that's the trouble though with British culture, like especially English culture. Like it's just the whole go to church 3 times a year, if that, right? You know, I think more people go
Yeah.
in to walk around the church than actually stay in there, right? That's always the tourism trap piece, right?
Well, I think so. While I agree with that, I think,
Mm.
and I don't want to bash anyone,
No, no, no,
um,
no, no, no.
but I think it's the biggest issue with Protestantism, honestly, um, because this is the problem when people step away from the main church and they take the bits they like and then they change the bits they don't, and then there's another breakaway and the same thing happens, and then that's why the message gets more diluted the further back you go. But with Protestantism, like Church of England, you know, they kept the good bits, or most of the good bits, but then they changed the little bits, like so they got rid of the rite of the sacrament of reconciliation, so confession is no longer a thing. So people don't feel the need to come to church to confess. um, so that's a big thing. Then they changed the standpoint on the taking of the Eucharist. So it's no longer actually the body and blood of Christ. You're just doing it in a ceremonial gesture, the reenactment of the Last Supper. So you're there in symbolic um, reenactment of the Last Supper, versus what we believe is we are actually there at the Last Supper. The altar is the altar of sacrifice. We are witnessing Christ sacrifice himself. And that little wafer in that moment becomes the body and blood of Christ. So when we ingest it, we are ingesting divine essence. That changing point of view takes something from being wholly sacred to, well, it's just a symbolic gesture, isn't it? You know, whatever. I don't need to go to church. Why would I need to go to church? Because God's with me all the time. That's not the point. The point is that we're joining in and we're reaffirming our covenant with God. It's the new Passover. People forget that Catholicism, Christianity as a whole, technically should be Judaism 2.0. So
Mm-hmm.
we have rituals in place that we should adhere to because they're important. Whereas when you start to strip away the sacred and you make it more of a symbolic gesture, which is why you
Oh,
end up with
thank you.
churches with such a poor attendance.
This is the thing. I would say even this is why paganism is an issue, because it's like Protestantism 2.4, you know, it's one of those, that whole symbol. Well, it really grinds my gears. And I have a running theory that most people who are really trying to connect it back in with a like tradition, this is why we see so many traditional witchcraft folk really connecting with African traditional religions, because those African traditional religions like voodoo, like Lukumi, have had that influence with Catholicism and their own like lineage going back with into Africa, right? I feel like a lot of people are trying to plug back in to the experience, to actually experiencing spirituality, as opposed to it being just a symbolic, like, oh, you know, and when you look at Obod, and I love Obod, don't get me wrong, but it's a lot of the material comes from that symbolic point of view, very Protestant point of view, right? And like symbols can't fuck you up like spirits can, right?
Very true.
you know, like the glory of God, if we're taking a Christian context, right? The glory and fear of God is not about that you're going to get squished. It's that fear, that awe of this massive thing.
That's the
Well, if
thing,
that's
right? It's like,
symbolic, yeah.
yeah, if we plonked you in the ocean next to a blue whale, the whale's not going to kill you, but you would be in awe and at the same time quite scared. Not because it's evil and it's going to attack you, because you're next to this monumental creature.
Mm-hmm.
It's just it'd be mind blowing. So yeah, the fear of God. It's not about actual fear. It's more about awe and marveling at its majesty and its awesomeness.
And I suppose also knowing how small you are by comparison, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that ego piece. Yeah. We could go on and on and on. Now you've really activated like my medieval studies piece here. But it was so lovely to sit down with you, Lyndon. Thank you so much for coming on. And thank you for everything that you shared today.
Oh, you're very welcome. It's been a
This
pleasure.
was good. Yeah. For your very first interview, how do you think it went?
Very well, thank you.
Perfect. So you are on Instagram. If people want to connect with you outside of your podcast, first of all, the podcast I'll put down in below. Go and listen to it, folks. It's wonderful. I always enjoy kind of listening in on their conversation, and it's always a wonderful time. If people want to connect with you outside of that, how can they connect with you?
Instagram would be the best one. So my Instagram handle is Pilgrim in the Mist, mist spelt MYST.
Okay, I will also put that down there. And apart from that, like, are you doing any speaking events coming up? This will probably go out in October sometime. So, are there any speaking events that you're doing in coming up or in the new year?
No, not me. Clint may have some, so it might be worth just kind of touching base with him, the other half of Shovel Up Your Awen. But I don't have any at the moment. I've said to Clint, like, I'm happy to do like Mercy and Gathering again in the future. That'll be next year. But like, there's not really a place for me in a pagan camp, really. And I have zero interest in going to a Christian camp. The idea of sitting there singing fucking Kumbaya and holding hands, absolutely not. So I don't know. I might get invited to do a talk at some point somewhere, but yeah, that'll be put up on social media.
That's too funny. I have many jokes about that, but well, my background, I grew up in a town of 8,000 that had 18 churches and only one of them was Catholic. So I grew up with those types of people. So, I was never invited because I was too gay, way too gay for that, I'm way too British. That was the other issue. Anyways, thank you so much, Lyndon. I will put all those links down below, and join us next week as I interview another spiritual practitioner of folkloric and traditional witchcraft or any kind of adjacent practice. This has been Lyndon. I've been Ben. Thank you so much. Have a good rest of the week.